Can you guys virtually confirm if you can hear the audio? I don't know if there's a microphone in this computer. It's going to be pretty tough. I'm honestly not sure if there's a microphone anywhere here. I did. Let's see. I hope so. I can hear. Awesome. That's great. Cool. Okay, guys. So let's do a quick demo. The basics of it, as you know, is always have a flash drive. Always save your stuff in your flash drive. Bring in your reference images. Bring in your files. So I worked in my own headset, but then I saved my file and brought it here under Save Files. That's how you can save it back to your device. And also under reference images, where you brought all of your sketches and stuff, I brought in a couple PNGs. So these two PNGs are basically just a general texture, and we're going to see if it works. I've done it before, and we can play with it. All right. So with that in mind, get into VR. By the way, I know that some of the cables we've been having a couple issues with charging. I ordered new cables through that. So soon, I hope this week we'll have new ones so we can make sure that all the controllers are always charging. But all four computers should be working. So that hopefully is a good thing. So this is what we'll talk about. Feel free to ask any questions. All of this is recorded. So let's take it by steps. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have played with surfacing in Gravity Sketch so far? A little bit. How many have played with sub-D surfacing? Okay, a couple. I'm sure many of you use CAD softwares that have sub-D, for example, Blender. It's the same concept. Sub-D is really intuitive that way. And we'll talk about the differences in a moment. But please, stop me at any point if you have any questions. Because this kind of a workflow, guys, it honestly is very, very powerful. So basically, what I want to show you, what is that over there? I have never seen that. Oh, okay. Okay, what I want to show you is the progression. So hopefully by the end of this project, you'll have a file that more or less looks like this. The idea is, you started out with a couple line work sketches. These are probably a little bit more on the refined side. So most of you probably started even more like loose, like you started with really, really basic line work like this, because it was all about finding those main proportions, right? So many of you probably started more at this thumbnail level. The idea for today was, or even for last week, was to start finding some that you like. So this is an example of a little bit of a tighter sketch, just the lines are a little bit more precise. If I go into the actual layers, and again, the importance of this is really, really paramount. Save things in your layers. And by the way, you can always switch components to different layers. Does anyone have a question on how to move something from one layer to another? Would that help if I showed you? Okay, cool. So everything right now is under lines, like these lines right here. As you know, you can always create new layers. You can click on existing layers and, for example, change the name of them. Right now, I click on it here. So I can always change the name. This is just interior. But basically, if I want to just work with, like if I want to fix a couple things without having to modify the entire layer, one thing you can do is, for example, I create a new layer. I don't know, I just call it whatever, test. And then I have my lines layer deactivated, right? So this is the layer we're talking about, and I can select anything in it because the lock is open. And something you can do is once you select something, in the same way you can move it, duplicate it, edit it, or whatever. If you have your layers panel open, you can always hover over and drag it. As you can see, it's highlighting different layers. So I can just simply hover over the new one, test, and then drop it. If I lock this one and keep just my test layer, the new one, then now this element is here. So that's kind of nice because before it was grouped with everything else. Now I can just manipulate this one. And for example, I don't know, if I wanted to add something else, just be mindful of how many points you add just to try to keep things in order. But yeah, in this case, if I want to move it back, all I do is grab this line and then drop it back on interior. And then I can even delete um, layers. The way you delete layers is, the same operations always apply. Selecting is always the same regardless of whatever you select. Layers, you select them the same way. So I drag them here and I have a layer selected. My deleting button for any surface or line also applies for layers. So I can delete that layer and it asks me to confirm, and then I confirm, and I no longer have that layer. So layer management is super important. Anyways, this is another example. Let's say another iteration based on this one. And if you remember last class, where we ended up with the demo was we had a couple directions, then I brought the inspiration back and started pushing some of these a little bit farther. And this was kind of the sketch that I was landing on. And this was pretty like good enough for me to want to move forward with that. So that's pretty much what I did. I'll show you the step by step, but let's have a look at the different levels so you can see what to expect. So basically, this sketch right here is an attempt to build that one over there. As you can see, there's many similarities. I took some liberties, honestly, here and there, because even though this is a nice detailed sketch in many ways, it's really not fully detailed. For example, I have no idea what happens between the wheel and this. So that's why we use VR, because in VR, you can actually figure it out. Same with the rear wheel. That sketch doesn't tell me, oh, actually, you have to build a whole section and then, add a couple more things later. So this is the first step, and I'll show you the step by step on how to do it. The key is to work in layers. Again, maybe the environment in this case is a little bit weird. Maybe for now, let's find something like this so we can see more dramatic surfacing. And I'm also, I grouped everything that's glass in one layer, and I can just simply lower the opacity, and that's kind of cool because you can see exactly, what you would see. The next step from it, which we will also explain, and ideally this is the level I would want us all to be by the end of the project. um, this is the level of it. So in this case, I still have the line work. You can see the lines, but I muted them. So in the previous one, they were very dark. In this case, it's the same color as the body, but everything is in there. I even added a few details. For example, the lights. This is the cool thing about sub desurfacing. You can do some pretty complex things. And even if you look at this whole panel, this is just one surface all the way around. And then, you know, uh, same with the sketching tools. With the revolve tool, I can build a wheel. I can sketch different spokes using polar symmetry. The main difference here is I'm still using my sketch lines, and I can always reference them here. So if I go to my menu, I can turn them on and off, and it's not a perfect surface model. As you can see, there's still some gaps because I was using my lines to snap my surfaces to them. So, when you get up to a point like this, you have a couple options. You can literally export these surfaces as they are to Keyshot and then just render it in Keyshot, or you can bring this into CAD. You can export this data and clean it up a little bit more, or just take nice screenshots from here and go to Photoshop directly, or a mixture of all of the above. The next level obviously is, so let me go back for a second. We had our line work here. This is a pretty tight sketch. This is what I would hope that you're arriving to a level like this. This was my direction that I liked, and then I built the line work of that direction. Obviously, the rear view of this didn't give me a lot of insight. So in Gravity Sketch, I had to figure it out a little bit more, which it turned out okay. I was playing with the section and all of that, but very thin, very precise line work. I still have my human on the inside, the interior, so I'm referencing everything as it happens. And then basically adding surfaces to it. The next level, I still kept the same lines, but I added more details. So for example, this triangle here, which is a key CMF component, in this case, I expanded a little bit on it. The wheels before were barely indicated, and here I actually built them. I also built details for the headlights. The next level is removing the lights. You don't have to reach this level for this project. I'm showing you just so you can start seeing, and I'm more than happy to guide you to get to this level if you want to. But in this case, I am removing all the lines. This is just surfaces, like an actual CAD model. That's where Gravity Sketch is becoming so powerful, because you can get a fully surface model right from the software without need, to do anything else. And the cool thing is, once you have a model like this, you can duplicate it and start playing with other CMF. So this is another version of the same model, but just inverting the CMF. And yeah, you can also play with the lighting and the environment and take some really nice screenshots from here. If you can put together a couple pages in this project, the next gen project, of different levels of exploration, that's why this overview is pretty nice, because you go from simple line work to more refined line work to early surfacing to final surfacing. So anyways, just to circle back to where we were, what I'm asking for all of us currently is, first of all, clean up your line work based on your direction that you like so far, which in this case it's this one, and try to play with it. I took some liberties. For example, this one is a little bit more angular, the sketch, but in Gravity Sketch I made it a bit more rounded. So this profile is a little bit more rounded, and that's by design. I wanted to play with that. But this is pretty nice. And then the next level is using sub desurfacing, and that's what the demo is going to be about. And basically, you start building it. So going into sub D, this is my first and main body layer. Something I want to point out is all of this section, all the way around, is one surface. That's the power of sub D. In many previous systems before sub D, you had to lay out individual surfaces. Now, and even within Gravity Sketch, you can get pretty precise. So for example, let me show you the layout of this. I will also save this model, and you can open it and look at the surfaces. Basically all it is, and here's where I was saying the line work is absolutely essential. So for example, in this case, I have my top line, my bottom line, and it just goes all the way around. It's a pretty precise line. All I needed was a surface that goes around it but stops here because there's a different detail. So once I did that, I tried keeping it fairly simple. So there's a couple, like a row of points that snap to the top line, row of points that snap to the bottom one. And then I had one in the middle just so you could give it a little bit of thickness. So if you remember, like this profile over here, this is changing, and having a middle row helps me a lot because I can really emphasize what that is doing, and you can drag the points as much as you want. So this is the nature of it, but I'm going to do it from scratch and then we can talk about it. So I'm creating a new layer, basically. Like I said, the key to sub D is the line work. I'm sure you're familiar with this panel pretty closely already. What I want to use mostly is under surfaces. I like to use two main features here predominantly. One is point mode, which is the same concept as sketching in point mode, but in this case, I hold my first trigger, and then with my second trigger, basically every time I press my second trigger, it drops a new point. This is not a sub D surface yet. I'll talk about it in a minute. But the nice thing about this is, you know, that's all it is. All there is to it. You're dropping two edges, and then you can later go back in here and add points, subtract points. You can edit this, scale it, whatever you need. So that is the first one, which is point mode. You literally bridge yourself between two different things. The other one, which is more precise, and I think is a good start for this, although take it lightly, is bridge curves. Bridge curves, as the name says, what it does is it snaps a surface from two curves. And you can have a couple different settings. You can if it's a whole loop, you can set it to full curve, so it'll snap the whole length of the curve. In this case, that's not what I want. In order for this to work, as you can see, nothing is happening. The reason for that is my lines layer is unlocked, is locked, sorry. So something I have to do is I'm working in my new layer that I don't have anything in, but I'm referencing the line, so I have to unlock my lines, this layer right here. Once I do that and I go back to surfaces and then bridge, basically once I hover over, as you can see, two of the lines are highlighted. If I started clicking on it, it starts snapping. So that's what I'm gonna do. As you can see, that's what I did. And I let go just right here. I didn't do it, well, just to show you, you can start doing it all the way around, just like that. My main thing to be mindful of, honestly, is many times when you do a whole surface like that, it creates really, too many points. In my experience, keeping it simple is helpful. If you want to do it like this, that's perfect. But just be aware that there's a lot of points in here, and your surfaces can get pretty complex. Um, and obviously, this middle row right now is concave. That's not the goal of what I wanted to do. So that's where you go into sub D. So once I laid out a surface, you will always have a menu. If that menu doesn't appear, it's because you've pressed the purple button. So if I press the purple button, it goes away. If I press it again, it comes back. This is how you get it back. The one I'm looking for is convert to subdivision object. This is a very powerful thing. So once I click on that, as you can see, it changed just a little bit of the typology of it. But I highly recommend you watch tutorials on their YouTube channel on explaining, each of the features. There's a lot of things you can do. For example, I can select this whole row and just really quickly change the profile of it. The benefit of sub D is it's so powerful. You can just simply snap points to different places. Right now, if you look at my snap grid over here, it's all the way down. Something I would recommend for what we're doing is set it to the one in the middle. The one in the middle means it snaps to other points and other objects. So for example, just the one in the middle. The third one, I think it's too much. It basically snaps to everything. If you have it in the middle, for example, I have this point right here. If I come anywhere close to the line, it snaps it directly, and I can just drag it around. And that's pretty helpful. So for example, if I come close to this edge, and then come close to this edge, then come close to this edge, basically it snapped it here. Although, however, since this is a center line, sometimes you might need to, what it's missing is it doesn't have enough editing points. Let me see. I think there's something weird happening in here. So that's the benefit of sub desurfacing, though. You can always modify the points. You can change them. Um, this one, which is right here, I think we're missing one. Yeah, here we go. So I can drag this to the edge right here, and it snaps to the line. The main issue is it actually had 2 points. That's why bridge curves, you have to be very careful, because in some cases it might do something like that. And then this is pretty crazy right now, like as far as surfacing. So you basically have to clean it up. Let me just use a different color so we can see it. When I'm editing it, all I'm doing is pretty much aligning my CVs, my points. I think there's two of them in here, which is kind of weird. Let me start over so we can start a little bit simply. So with bridge curves again, I snap it to these two, but I only do a little bit of a section. This is, you'll see with sub D, this is pretty common. You start with a little bit of it and then you start extending it or increasing the complexity. And here, when I edit it and make it sub D again, it shows me that there's all these points. There's honestly many of them. Like for such a simple surface, this is really complex. So in some cases, honestly, using the regular point mode might be simpler, even though it doesn't snap at least at the beginning. So for example, look at that. This thing that I just laid out is not perfect in any way, but when I edit it and make it sub D, it's a pretty simple surface. It has 2, 4, and 6 editing points. Very nice and simple. And when I turn snap in the middle, again, it does the same. So it snaps to this line, snaps to this line, does the same here, and does the same here. This is a pretty good start. And then the nice thing about sub D, just like in Blender, you can select either points, you can select the vertices, the lines, or you can select the faces. And you can modify any of those. So in this case, I can just select the vertices and give it that profile. And this is my starting point. So for example, now that I have this, I can click on this one up here that is called, it basically selects the loops. If you're familiar with Blender, many of these commands will be very intuitive. If I click here, basically it will select both of them, this one and this one. If I don't click it, it will only select one, but that's fine too. So if I just select one and then click my trigger, I can drag it and then basically drop it, and it creates an extension. And I can do the same, um, one second, I can do the same here. Let me do just one so we can see the difference. And then you can just snap it to the other and it basically joins it. But I've just found that it's easier when you have the auto select loop and then click and it extrudes both. All I'm doing right now is quickly giving myself enough guidelines, and I can always snap to the points later. I have my middle point, so I can always bring it here. Don't worry right now about the curvature on the edges. That's the nature of sub-D surfaces, but we have tools to clean that up, and I'll show you. Basically, I hope you see that this is a much simpler surface. I can even drag it all the way to the edge of where I need it to go and snap it here. And then this is beginning to look pretty okay. The reason why it looks okay is because my lines from before were pretty precise. So here's where it makes a big difference to do that. If it's the same surface going around, then I can just simply continue doing the same. I select the vertices and click my trigger, and notice how I'm dropping a point every time the curvature is changing. So I'm paying attention to my line, and basically everywhere the curvature significantly changes, that's where all of these are happening. So look how many editing points I dropped here, and it's because it's turning, it's changing fundamentally. And then I'm doing the same down here, just snapping it to the edges. Having clean lines makes this process really quick. As you can see, just in a few, like a minute or two, I ended up with the whole surface, and it's perfectly aligned, perfectly snapping. You might just have to worry about the middle row, and you might have to, just pay attention to how it's behaving. Um, but so far, so good. Does anybody have any questions so far? I'm gonna keep going, but I would rather stop right now if you have any questions. Anything from anyone? Yeah, absolutely. You can add more So that's the really awesome thing about sub D, that you can add or remove complexity. I'm keeping the surfacing a bit more simple, well, the reflection, so we don't worry about that right now. So the basics of it I wanted to show you, which is how to lay out the surfaces. Once you have something going, there's so many more options. Remember, I'm using the middle snap feature, and then there's a couple options here, but the one I want to show you right now is the middle button in here on my right controller, the one that has the tools. Once I'm in editing mode of a surface and I press that, it gives me additional tools. These are, to your point, Jack, these are tools to help you change or modify the complexity of your surfaces. The one that I'm going to use right now is the second one, this kind of chisel or like sharp looking tool. This one is to subdivide even more. So for example, if I select that, I have it right now here, and I go into my sub D surfaces. Basically, this allows me to add a point wherever I need it. So for example, here, if you look at this surface, there's kind of a little radius, and just one point at the end doesn't really describe it well. So I might want to add a little bit more complexity. So again, in my sub D mode, if I press the center button and then select, just look up, I can show you a few of these, but there's tutorials for each of these. So I select the second one. Basically, if I hover over any of the lines, I can drop a point wherever I want. So I'm going to drop one pretty close to the edge right here. It drops one point. And then on the other line, I want to do the same and then click. So if I remove my lines layer, basically what that did is it added this line right here, which in turn allows me to change the complexity of the surface, and I can do that anywhere. Even I wouldn't recommend this unless there's a good aesthetic reason why, but you can even bridge middle diagonal. So I can select, one second, usually you should be able to select one of the points and then another, and then basically it added a middle surface. And this could be pretty cool. Like I can now drag just this edge and look at the form is significantly changing, or if is affected by that. But in this case, let me go back to before that. So that's one of the tools, and honestly, many of those modifiers can be found in the sub-D menu. I'm gonna keep my lines a little bit faded so we can see more of the surface. So here's what we have. Depending on the logic behind what you're doing, so if we look at this sketch right now, in many ways, this top surface is related to this bottom surface. So it all goes back to the sketch. If I look at my sketch, all of this is the same surface, but there might be some places where it's a hard line. So that's something I want to show you. So for example, even from the same one, since it's sub D, you can always add a new division. So I'm just gonna select one of the lines and extrude it down. I literally just extruded one of those down. And then basically I can do the same um, for all of these. And remember, they snap to the points because I set it to that mode. So basically what you're doing is creating more complex surfaces. Let me see, in this case, it didn't snap it. Okay, now it did. So basically it's joining a new surface to it. And then something I want to show you, another of the tools is the crease tool. So for example, let me do just a couple more things and then we'll use crease. In this case, I'm adding another division. Let's just keep it simple for now. But basically, I'm extruding it out. The recommendation I have is keep it very simple at the beginning because it's much easier to edit a simple surface than to have something super complex with many, many points and then you don't know where to go from there. So in this case, I have this middle row, and let's say this has a much more negative profile. So I can drag this and drag it towards the inside, and then this point can snap to the line. But now it's starting to have more of a diagonal one. The same goes for if I want to add more complexity. So I can select a whole line of points or a whole face. I think it works better with a face. So let me go into my faces. I don't know why it's not letting me. So in here, this one. And then if I click my trigger, basically adds a new layer, a new division. But basically what I'm looking for right now is a simple surface that goes through the main points and it's obviously snapping to where I need it to. But another one I want to show you is when you click on this same panel, this arrow is for creasing. So basically, if I click on this arrow and I say, okay, all of these lines are actually a hard line. You do have to select them. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky, but as you can see, what it's doing is cleaning them up and turning them into a hard line. Let me remove the sketch line so we can see what it did. Maybe actually this material is not super. Don't know why it's not reflecting very well. Let me see if we can find maybe this one. So what I just did, basically it turned that into a hard line. This is how you, in surfacing, you do that. And look at the kinds of reflections we're starting to get. These are pretty cool. Let me go back so we can see I'm undoing, or I can undo everything I just did by using the same tool. 1 second. So I'm in my editing menu. This has a blue line now. which represents a crease. The way I used that was with that, with this right here. And I can do the same. So let's say it's more of an aesthetic feature, but I actually have a crease down a different line. It's kind of hard to see with this environment, so bear with me. Okay, remember we have this other line going down here. Maybe I want to add a few more points. Let's see, because this color is not very helpful, at least for modeling. Okay, this is a little bit better. So with adding this one to add more points, maybe I can say, yeah, off of this one, I want to have a very specific design feature that goes all the way around. So what I did is I just added this second line, but it's not going all the way across. I'm actually going to remove this so we can just focus on it. What I just added was this second line, but it only goes for all some of the faces, not all of them. But for example, in here, I want to crease these new lines that I created. So I click here, it's blue. Click here, it's blue. Click here, it's blue. And then I can actually change a little bit of the gesture. Maybe I bring it more to a positive read. And then when I zoom out, look at what we just created. We created a hard line with a more complex surface. So this is in essence, sub-desurfacing. All it is you started with one simple surface, like this one. You turn it into a sub-D surface once you start, and then you can really start modifying it in any way you want. So this sub-D surface that now just has 6 points, I can start adding different things, and then I can select another face, for example, and start doing anything you want. This mode of surfacing is very powerful because you can edit it in any way you want. For example, if I create a new face here and I snap this point to this one and this point to this one, then it joins it all of a sudden. The main thing though to get started, I would say, is your sketch. Your line drawing is key. As you could see, the reason why we were able to build this so quickly is because I was just snapping my lines to the surfaces. And if you look, for example, this curvature right here is not faithful to the line I had. It's actually, there's a gap. So something I can do is go back into the edit mode. And since I have a line in the middle, I can basically start dragging it. In some cases, I want to remove my snap so I have more freedom. Basically, I want to start playing with these points in space. So when I look at it, it actually fills the volume of the line. And work in specific layers. So all of this that we're doing is in one layer. Maybe I create a new one. I lock the previous one, but I'm still keeping my lines open because I want to snap surfaces to them. Then with this one, I go back and I do the same. Maybe I start in point mode, for example, or let's start in bridge again so we can see. Bridge, basically, it hovers over one line, hovers over another, and then I basically automatically snap surfaces to them. This is the main issue. Like I said before, it tends to be very complex. So when I turn it into sub D, gives me all of these. The nice thing though is you can always, in the same way we were adding points and adding divisions, you can remove points and divisions. The way you do that is just simply selecting them. So right now I'm selecting a whole row. If I click delete, it's very smart. So it doesn't break it, it actually simplifies it. So look at how quickly I'm turning a very complex surface to a much simpler one. Now it's just 4 faces and it's still snapping to the edges, and I can give it the curvature I want, and then I can continue doing the same. So actually my snap is not set up, so right in the middle, and then snap here, snap here, snap here, and then I worry about these other points. So you can see it's pretty quick once you have some lines going, and that's all it is. Like just like that in one, I don't, not even a minute. I'm starting to get a pretty representative surface of the windshield and the side glass, and I can continue doing that. The main thing I would watch out is the layout of your surfaces. You don't want to have, for example, this row of points in the middle, it's kind of going in a similar direction. I wouldn't want to have one point all the way down here because look what it's doing to the surface. So that's pretty much it. And then I can continue using my trigger to create more and more divisions. And again, look how every time there's a change in the curvature, I'm adding a new point with my trigger. And then for the top, I can just come back and pretty much snap snap it to the curvature. And pretty quickly, you end up with that. And then obviously my middle points are not where they should be right now. So I can clean them up a little bit better. And look at how it's really not representative yet of the curvature. So this might be a question of, do I have enough editing points or do I need to add more? For most of it, it looks pretty good, but it needs more. It needs to be more full over here. So once I have my top row and bottom row snapping to the curves, I can remove the snap feature. And then basically what that allows me to do is move the points anywhere, but I want to be very careful. So I want to start playing just with the middle points, and I'm being a bit more exaggerated with them because I want to make sure that it fills that section line. From this perspective, it is, but then there's a big disconnect here. So what I want to do is lay out my points in a very clean way. It's all about, think of it as a line that you sketch. It has to be continuous. It can't be disproportionate. So this already is beginning to look a little bit better. So look at the layout of the points. They're going in the same direction. They're going in a similar curvature, and now it is covering the whole section. So that's in essence, we just did one, and then let's do the top glass. This one should be pretty easy too, because it's pretty much snapping both lines together. Maybe this is a good example actually of doing something new, which is the same one, bridge mode. But look how, yeah, like this right here. Oh, here. Awesome. So yeah, honestly, well, if it's a like an early surfaced model, the best way to do it is with a crease. So if I'm in editing mode and then I click this center button, then I go to my crease, which is this arrow. All I need to do is click on the edge and then it completes it, and then click on the edge and it completes it. This should be fine for this level. For what we're doing right now, this should be fine. um, the more and more complex you get, and this is something I'd be happy to get into, and I'm sure Matt can help us out too. For example, when you start getting to a fully surfaced model, in here, it's almost like I would start moving away from creases and I would start adding more secondary lines. That's kind of hard to explain. Basically, right now, this surface, this change right here, it's the same surface, but I creased this entire line all the way around. So I basically made it a hard line, right? But in some cases, this might not work very well. This is a little bit more advanced, but basically what I mean is, for example, with this one right here, in some cases, rather than creasing, what you do is in the middle line, you start adding two other rows of points that you can describe. And when you zoom out, it looks like a harder line, but this is the right way to do it, especially when you 3D model. This is how you would do it. You would make sure that you're adding complexity, and that's pretty nice because this looks like a hard line pretty much, or almost like a hard line, but it's not. And this one isn't either. This right here feels kind of like a hard line, but when we edit it, it actually has 3 points all the way around. This is a little bit more advanced. I'm more than happy to explain how to get here, but for the most part of what we need, and this is what I even did in the model, is you just crease some of these edges. So going back to this surface, this whole thing is one surface. That's the cool thing about sub D. Like all of this going all the way around. The only one I didn't build with it is this surface around this wheel. But even then, there are tools in Gravity Sketch to join them. Um, I can get into that. It's a little bit messy, honestly, that part of the process, but I can get into it if we had any questions later. But yeah, Haley, yeah, absolutely. Let me get rid of the mirror plane because it's a bit distracting. So let me duplicate this so we can see the difference. All right, so let's remove the points in this example. Oops. Okay, so right now, this surface right here only has one row of points in this corner. If I wanted this line basically going around to be a hard line, the easy and quick way to represent that, if you wanted to do it just more visually, the quick way to do that is by creasing the edges. So basically, with my creasing tool, I select here, select here, select here, and basically what that did is it turned it into a hard line, right? That's what it did. If I go back, look how, oops, a second. Basically, it turned it into a hard line, and I can uncrease with the same arrow. If I click a line that's blue, that's creased, then it basically removes it. And this could be an interesting thing to play with. Some lines could be creased, and then where it stops being creased, there could be a cool transition. So look at this transition. It goes from a hard line to a completely smooth and faded surface. This is something pretty powerful. Like I was telling Haley, for the most part, you can get away with doing that. But in all reality, and if you want to start, going into the next level of things, the right way to do that is not to crease, or you can crease the this same line, but I would still add two rows of lines of the same kinds of points. So like we're doing in here. The reason for that is you can really, really control everything about the surface. Like if I once I have two rows on the outside of my main row, the original one, then in here you can actually really control what's going on. You can control the gap, you can control, even if you bring the points much closer together, it will look more and more like a crease line because they're very close to each other. And this is how in real surfacing, like in CAD, you would do it, because in all reality, you will never find a product that has an actual single crease line, in the same way that you will never find objects with an outline in real life. Everything has surface, so even a hard line will have a very, very tiny radius. This is how you would indicate that. Do you, that's exactly right. Yeah, and it does the same as a crease, but this gives you even more control, because you can grab the outer edges, bring them closer, bring them farther. Maybe you can taper them, at the very beginning, like I'm showing here. These are pretty much at the same plane, so it's pretty much a flat line. And the cool thing is, as we start getting here, I can start bringing the points closer and closer until we have a very tight crease, and then going all the way around. And likewise, maybe at the end, I can. Right now they're spaced out, so they're creating that surface. But maybe I can clean it up again and make it feel like a flat surface. You see, and then when we look at it, it looks and feels like a crease going all the way around, but it tapers at the end, and then it tapers at the end. So you get much nicer, cleaner transitions. Would it help if I showed you how to create divisions like this? Awesome. And everyone, please feel free to ask questions. I'm glad you guys are asking this, but I hope it's not confusing, especially if you're just getting into surfacing. These kinds of things might be a little bit confusing. So we can circle back to what I was doing in a minute, but basically how you do it is, I don't know why it doesn't let you do it when you select an edge. You have to select a face. So what I do is I click on the select edge loop. So basically, again, what this does is, right now I can only select one edge, but if I click here, selects the whole edge loop all the way around. If I click on my whole face loop, which is this one, and then click my trigger, it basically adds a new division. So I click here, and then I pretty much press my trigger. This is in a way, it's a way of extruding. So what I just did is I extruded a whole face. But if you're very careful, what it does is it adds points. So for example, here, it added this second row of points, but it also added on the other side. So something I want to be careful of is going back in here and deleting it from the side I don't need it. Let's see. I think it's this one, the one that we don't need. And then now I have it on one side, if that makes sense. But it has to be with the faces. And same here. So once I have these two and I want to add a third one, many times you can get away with just two. Actually, look at how my points are getting a bit messed up somewhere over here. So I think there's a weird overlap. Okay, there we go. So that's a little bit better. And I can add another one. So I select this edge loop, click my trigger, and then basically it creates a new one. Just be careful of where you're putting your points. I'm sure there might even be additional ways of doing this. Maybe this is a good question for Matt tomorrow. But basically what we ended up with are the three. This case, I don't think they're in the right order. So basically have to find which go where. I think, yeah, in this case, there's four of them. So that's how I would do it. And now you have a nice edge that you can control. You can still crease one of them. In this case, this is a cool thing. Both edges are creased. So look at how I created a chamfer, just like that. Basically, these two rows of points are creased with this arrow. And then what that means is surfacing wise, you created a crease. And then we can make it fade too by removing the crease from this one and this one. Look at how we have a chamfer that now fades. Any questions off of that, guys? Does that make sense? In essence, why all of this matters, or where it's all helpful for our assignment, is right here. So this is where we were, right? We're beginning, based on a clean line work drawing, we're beginning to patch it up with sub-D surfaces that are giving us an insight into the actual volumes. Let's do the top of the glass so we can just remember again how we do it. In this case, something I want to try. Remember, we've been using surfaces, both point mode and then bridge curves. In this case, the full curve is not activated, so I might want to activate it. What this does, let me deactivate it as before, and we can see the difference. So when it's not active, basically I can drag it wherever I want, from wherever I want to wherever I want. But if it is activated, it should snap the whole length of the curve. So now it's activated, and it snapped it all the way around. This is pretty awesome. It's a one-step operation. Yes. Uh, like a line or a surface? I think so. So what do you mean? Like you would want to like split it into two, for example? Yeah, for sure. So in the same way, so there's a couple things here. When I am editing a line like this one, let me get rid of this layer so we can see it better. You can, in the same way you can add points, you can always remove points. So if I select this point and hit delete, it will remove it. So that's a good starting point. So what you're saying is, if I have a loop, like how can I turn this into two lines? Honestly, the easiest way to do it is to duplicate them and delete half of the points of one and half of the points of the other. So for example, I duplicated one, and then basically, well, it's much easier when it's not looped. Let me go back and try that. So let's say this is my line. The honestly, the easy way would be probably to duplicate it. I would try to be very intentional when I lay my lines to not run into these issues, because we had that happening before with a demo we were doing with Haley, where one of her lines was a loop completely and then another one, and it doesn't let you bridge between them. So you might have to detach it. But in this case, I don't know, something I would try is probably worry about one of them. For example, like this, let me paint it something different. So I have one of my lines up here. And remember, the way I did this was just simply duplicating it. Then I can replicate the same curve, and then I can duplicate it in the other direction, and um, and try to delete the other side. So I'm grabbing the other points that I don't need from the top. Then let's bring it up. So that's pretty close. If I delete the one I had before, now it's two lines. So it's essentially, I hope it's not the most intuitive, but I don't think Gravity Sketch inherently has a specific tool like that. The same goes for surfaces. Well, first of all, Theo, does that make sense? Okay, cool. So that's what I would do. Just duplicate it. And for surfaces, you might want to do the same. Um, they were right here. So if I duplicate this surface, I have all these points. That's another way that we can think about it. If for some reason I wanted to split this in half, it's kind of tough to do it in and of itself. So it might require me to go over here and then erase. Might take a little bit of work, but just basically erase all that row of points, and then I end up with the bottom half of the surface, and I do the same with the top. Basically, that would be a way of ending up with two different surfaces. Because I don't think, let me go back in here. I don't think there's any tools, at least that I know, that can do that. None of these do that, I think. Uh, I can talk about the plus tool more later. Basically, what this does is it joins two sub-D surfaces. I'll show you pretty much once I'm done. Basically, remember, we just created this in one operation. Let me create it again so you can see. So bridge curves, the full curve is activated. Select two curves, click, and then you're done. It created a whole surface between the two. Obviously, you have to go back and edit the point. So I can go back in here, set my snap to the middle, and it snaps right here. It has the right section. Then in here, this is supposed to be more of a concave surface. So I'm trying to give it, the curvature it needs. And then the same here, so snap it. And to Jack's point from earlier, this is a great example of we don't have everything we need. We one single point around does not give me everything to be able to get the full surface, the curvature. So here, this is a good example of maybe I need to add more points. First of all, it's not mirrored, but in my editing panel, I can turn it into a mirror surface. This is pretty easy. Basically, if I go back to my tools, remember, oh, it's not a sub-D surface, by the way. So I turn it into one. That was a mistake from my side. Now that it is, basically the main difference is the edges are curved like that, and we can crease them like we did before, or we can do a couple different things. But basically, to that point, I want to add another row over here. So if I click my options and then this one right here, basically what I can do is say, I want to add a row from here to here, click, and then this one I can snap closer. I can crease with my arrow the edges so it feels like it's where it needs to be, and then I can move these points out enough that they start snapping, and you can be very precise with this if you want. So right now, and that easily, we ended up with a surface that pretty much snaps really well all the way around, and I can drag the points farther. And going back to crease, I can crease this edge so it feels, for what we're doing, this is fine because we don't need it to do that. Anyways, so now we have that, and the cool thing is I have all of those in one layer, so I can turn down the opacity, and all of a sudden it's glass. That's pretty much how we do it. I don't want to get into it, but basically with this plus tool, you can basically join more than one surface. So this one, I can join it with this new one, and basically it turns it into one big one in the same way I did it before. One final thing I want to do before we answer any more questions is, let me go to one of the farther ones in here. So remember, I brought the PNG textures. That's something I don't want to forget to do. Basically, under my images, in the same way we've brought, canvas images and things like that. If you bring a texture, a PNG, for example, it should show up in here. So I can just look for it. This is one of them. It's super transparent. Let me see if I'm working in the right layer. Oh, okay. So it's super light. I don't know. I don't think this one is gonna work, but I brought a second one. Let's see if that one is a little bit better. So I'm gonna delete this one. Let's see. This one is a little bit better. So basically, I'm bringing this is a PNG, as you can see. It's a PNG image. I can put it right here for now. The cool thing about it is once you bring it into your canvas, automatically it brings it into your palette. So if I select this surface right here, which is in this layer, and I look at my colors, I have my previous colors, but I can also turn it into an image. This was the canvas image from before, and these are the textures from before. This is pretty interesting. So let me select one of them. And then now, this is a very quick way of indicating something pretty cool. Like it's technically behaving like a surface. I can do the same for the glass. Let's see if it works. So selecting my whole glass and selecting my material. Oops. Let me bring back the person and everything. I don't know. I think this has a lot of potential for aesthetics, like it feels like a legitimate effect and texture. And that's all it is. And when you export this as a screenshot with PNG transparency, this will behave like glass. Any questions about that, anyone? I just thought that's a pretty cool thing. So you can bring your own textures and apply them pretty much anywhere you like. Um, but anyways, guys, just to circle back, basically the demo and what we need to be doing is, number one, try to find that direction. So for example, the one up here that you like, and the goal is that you build that direction in Gravity Sketch. Really try to capture it, and it's okay if you modify or edit it beyond where your sketch was. That's the whole point of back and forth. This okay, here we go. That's the whole point of going back and forth. I mean, if my Gravity Sketch off of this one is exactly the same and it has the same flaws, then there's no point of having gone here. So in many ways, I feel this one is better than that one, especially because it's an actual 3D sketch that we can immerse ourselves in. That's number one. Number two, like the demo we just did, basically start surfacing between your lines. This is pretty much the demo we were doing, and take it step by step. Honestly, it's a little bit of repetition. It's okay if you don't know how to do a couple things. That's why we're here. So feel free to let me know. And the idea is that pretty soon you're able to block in your main surfaces. These are some of my main surfaces. Like I showed you before, I was building them kind of as a whole, but some of them were separate. And the cool thing is later you can join them. This was one. Then I had my surfaces two, where I built like a different colors. And here I built this plane, I built the triangle, and glass was where initially. So remember, my original sketch had a glass going all the way down, but later when I refined it, honestly, I was not very happy with that. So I don't know where it went. 1 second. Details. Okay, here we go. I wasn't very happy with that being glass. So for the next iteration, I made it the same body color. But look at how it's just incremental. This is a pretty good start. The next level will be adding a few more details. So building the wheel, and we can talk about that. The lights in this previous one was just a quick indication, like a simple pen operation. The next one, they're actually volumes. So in here, they're more like a volume. Feel free to play with other surfacing modes. Right now, we've only talked about surface, but there's some powerful ones in primitives. For example, if I go to subdivision, um, you can start out even with very basic, oops, 1 second, very basic volumes. Uh, just give me a second, erasing that here. Okay, primitives, some kind of a cube, sub D or non sub D. Oh, no, notice how I had the material from before? So it's creating an object in that material, which is kind of a weird thing, but I can always change the. But this is a very quick way of just starting out with a volume altogether, especially if I choose sub D. I can start out with a cube, and it's sub D, so I can always add things. So if you want to model out a very simple detail, like a light, for example, here, all I do is create a sub D cube and then extrude it out a couple times. Since it's sub D, it's circular by nature. But then now I can start editing things, like bring this whole face closer. I can add more complexity. Maybe it has a detail that comes up. Maybe, you drag some of the points inside, whatever it is. So that's exactly how I modeled, just very simply, these triangular things. And we can continue answering questions, guys, but I can save this file. Remember, a big part of it is taking good screenshots. So prepare for that. When you're taking good screenshots, remove everything you don't need. So I don't need, for example, the reference layer. I don't need my floor. So in settings, I don't need stage floor. And then in my screenshot, always make sure they're saving on their local. Sometimes they might be saving in the cloud. Don't do that because you won't be able to access them in the computer. Save them locally. And then in here, something I haven't shared with you is, well, first of all, transparent background, right? So if you see the color of your background in the image, then you are not having a transparent background. Something I want to show you is you have focal length, which is pretty awesome. So if I want to take pictures of the final one, for example, this one, I can take pictures in any way, but even here, I have some sliders. So this is my focal length. This makes it much flatter, like as if you were very far away, but this is much more dramatic. So I wouldn't exaggerate it too much, but this focal length is pretty dramatic. If you want to create a very awesome sketch, I would take screenshots with a little bit of focal length perspective, changed. And you even have the depth of field too, that pretty much just simulates the distance from where the picture is taken. Any questions at all? I know we covered a ton of things. More than happy to address that. Does that make sense? I know there's lots to it. From experience, guys, I'm sure many of the things I was showing won't click until you try them in Gravity Sketch. That's the sort of thing. We're trying to record everything, so you should have the demo. But honestly, some of the best ones out there are Gravity Sketch on YouTube. The ones I like to watch the most are the videos where they just sketch something, where they say, okay, let's create this object. Because by seeing how they created, you learn the different tools. But yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful software. Everything that you can see right here, basically, I created with just stroke and surface and maybe revolve for the wheels. But everything was just with those tools because there's so much that you can do inside of that. But basically, the level of what we're shooting for in this class hopefully will be something like this, meaning a surface model that you can keep your sketch lines in. So I still have them in here. And this might be something cool for you to do. So right now the sketch lines are the same material as my main color, but I can do anything I want. I don't know, whatever makes sense. This could be part of the aesthetic too. Likewise, it can also take like pretty weird forms like the textures and things like that. But anyways, and it goes a long way. To Theo's point from before, the way I built this surface detail is exactly by going off of the main one. So almost like duplicating this big surface, but just trimming it enough that I only kept a little bit of it. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Something I wanted to show you. I don't know if it's accessible in this version of Gravity Sketch. Let's try it out. So right now, I'm in the main menu. You're probably seeing just the main menu. There's an option called Gallery. Let's see if it's showing. Okay, well, when you're in VR, there's an option called Gallery. I highly, highly recommend you click in there. They're basically pre-saved models from like really, really good people all over the world that Gravity Sketch has chosen. Should be able to see it now. This is one of the models that's pre-saved in the gallery space. And the best part about it is you can analyze it in the same way you can analyze mine. You have all the layers, you have everything you need. For example, car body. If I wanted to play with this and actually, I don't know, do something different, make it reflective. So you can play and you can understand how other people did it. This one is awesome because it has a full sketch interior on the inside. It's an autonomous concept that has like a temporary steering wheel. But the cool thing is it's done with sub desurfacing. And in this one, they did crease some of the edges so I can see that they're blue. I can see how they constructed this whole thing here. They have some secondary surfaces. Basically, they added a row of CVs, of points, to create this positive surface. So this is pretty awesome. There's a whole other model you have access to. Remember, in the gallery, if I go back to gallery, there's a million models. I've never opened this one. Let's see. There's other products too. I'm opening a shoe right now. So if you're interested in shoe design, you want to see how it applies to Gravity Sketch, there you go. Let's see what else. And we all have access to all of this, which is awesome. There's so many models in here. Um, yeah, there's characters, there's like a jet, there's all their kinds of vehicles. There are whole other scenes. I've never opened this. Let's see. This might take a second. So even a whole painting, this is pretty cool. This is just to show you can create the whole environment scene for your products basically, and you can bring in, for example, my vehicle. I could bring it to a scene like this. This is something that now is possible in Gravity Sketch. You can go between files. Like I can bring my vehicle into a new file. All right. Well, I don't want to spend more time than we did already unless we have questions, but just be aware that there's entire models from professionals too. But they shouldn't be too far from what we're shooting for. Honestly, the kinds of models that I'm showing you and that we're planning for in the class, like this is not too far. It just needs more detail and then we get there. But anything from anybody? Remember, the final presentations for this project are next Wednesday. It's really, really up to you how you want to end the project. I would be perfectly fine if you presented, a theme direction more or less like this, both that you finish up a little bit in Gravity Sketch and then you take it somewhere else. So the point is, it's really up to you. Once you're done with Gravity Sketch, what you want to do with that. You can take it straight to KeyShot and render it in KeyShot. You can take it to CAD, clean it up, and then render it. I recommend you use Photoshop just for some parts of the process, like to finalize your renderings. And one of the deliverables is a context rendering. So once you have your final design, just do a context rendering. Yeah, this file is uploaded to this computer. I can attach the file in our Teams if you want to have access to it. But I hope Sub D is not that intimidating. It's really powerful. Once you start playing with it, it will make sense. I promise you. Sounds good. I'll leave it open right here. If anybody wanted to get into the file and play with it. But basically, what we're gonna do is just one-on-ones. Whoever is interested today, Matt is coming next week, so we'll be expanding on sub D, and we'll probably show us more of the primitive side when I show you how to know the detail. It's pretty good at using primitive, so that could be interesting. Cool. I hope you see the value of something like this. Like in an interview, if you can show, you can bring your audience to your scene where you created your projects like that. It's, I can promise you, it's more powerful than anything else we have. At the end, just open up your files here if you work here in class, and I'm more than happy to check them too. They will stuff everything.